Should I level 90 my character? Are crowns a waste? When do I stop farming artifacts? I feel like I've worked so hard, but my characters are not that much stronger. Welcome to Jello Impact, where we build and test every single character to help you decide who you want to wish for and build. And this is my ultimate character guide. This guide is broken up into 4 phases. I'm going to go through each one and talk about which parts of a character that you need to focus on at each stage, so that you are never in a loss of how to make your character stronger in the most efficient way possible. Let's start with phase 1, the early game or experimental phase. So for early, you are probably somewhere pre-AR45. During this phase, you are going through the story, enjoying the game, and I highly encourage you to level up as many characters as you think seem interesting, cool, or you just like them for one reason or another to you. But I'm gonna give you some guidelines so as to not waste resources. I do think it is very valuable to experiment. I do not think you should only build the meta units and only build what people tell you to build. During this phase, you want to experiment with, again, as many characters as seem interesting to you. But again, here are the guidelines so you don't waste resources. I would level anyone up to level 50. Anyone that seems interesting, Ningguang seems interesting, Lisa seems interesting, Sayu seems interesting, Kujo Sara, level them up to level 50. You get 2 wishes, it doesn't take that much experience, and you get to see their power and what their kit can do and what they're capable of. If you go too much beyond that, especially beyond level 60, especially beyond level 70, you start getting into the category of a big resource drain. But pre-level 50, as long as you're not trying to level up absolutely everyone and you generally just stick to the characters that you like, level 50 is fine. When you're building these level 50 characters, you're not going to have a bajillion gold artifacts like I do. You're going to have mostly 1, 2, 3, and maybe some 4-star artifacts. At this stage, you want to focus on, if you can, getting as much energy recharge onto the characters that need their burst as possible, and just generally trying to get main stats. The main stat is the one up here, where this one says Elemental Mastery. That's the main stat. You generally want to just get as close to at least a helpful main stat. It doesn't have to be the perfect main stat, but at least something the character can use. So Ningguang scales off of attack, so you'd like to find an attack main stat. Her ideal would be a geo damage bonus goblet, but you're not always going to have that. So an attack percentage goblet is going to be fine for you, and you don't need to worry about crit. Just use whatever you have. Try to get the right main stats. Don't worry about substats. Don't worry about set bonus unless you have absolutely no stats at all, and then you can look for a helpful set bonus if you can. For the weapon, similar thing, I would recommend taking the weapon up to level 50, another good safe spot that you don't need to worry about wasting too many resources. And artifact XP, you can level your artifacts up at least a little bit, because you don't lose that much XP when feeding those artifacts into better ones later. But there's not really that much to talk about in phase 1 because it really is all about you experimenting. I just want to give you the freedom to do that and not just focus on meta. So that being said, once you get to AR45, now we're going to move on to phase 2. Phase 2 is the built enough phase. This is the phase where the full potential of the character is going to come out. They're definitely not min-maxed, but by and large, they're going to be doing all the things that they will be doing at a higher level, just slightly less effectively. So when you're selecting your characters to be built enough, you want to select, of course, and I'll cover this more in my team building guide, but the main 4 to 8 to maybe 10 characters that you're going to build to tackle the Spiral Abyss, assuming you're interested in that. And you want to work on these 5 things. First of all is leveling up your characters to level 80. And at this point, we're not going to ascend them. We're just going to keep them like I have my Kaya here, level 80, not ascended. The final ascension is very, very expensive. And at this stage of the game, the stats you get from that final ascension are just not worth it. So you stick to level 80, not ascended. Energy recharge now is where you really want to focus on your energy recharge. You need enough energy recharge to use your burst on cooldown. Again, if your character is a burst dependent character, which the vast majority of the cast are. This is the biggest mistake I see. If you're not bursting off cooldown, it is very much worth it to use an energy recharge weapon if you need it, to use an energy recharge sands if you need it, and lose some of your crit ratio to make sure you have enough energy recharge. A character like Beto, it doesn't matter if you have 50% more crit. If it's taking you 4 times as long to burst, you're doing no damage, so make sure you have enough ER. At this point, assuming you have a good weapon for your character, you want to focus on level 90ing that weapon. 90ing a weapon is not that many resources compared to other things, and so most characters scale off of attack, and leveling their weapon is a must. I'm going to come back through here with exceptions, so hold your comments for a second. For talents, you want to level your talents to level 8 for those that use their talents. And again, I'll come back to the exceptions in a minute. Level 8 is a good sweet spot of doable but not super expensive. Once you go beyond level 8, they become very expensive. So level 8ing the useful talents is the correct stopping point. You next want to focus on your crit rate and crit damage. At this stage, you want to focus on getting at least a 50 crit rate to 100 crit damage ratio, ideally a 60 to 120. It's going to be a lot easier or more difficult depending on your character's ascension stat bonus. So for example, Xiangling, my Xiangling barely has a 60 to 120 crit ratio because I'm not using a crit weapon on her. She doesn't have a crit ascension stat, and so she just naturally has less crit stats. So for the character like Xiangling, 50 to 100 is what you want to aim for. But if you're running someone like a Hu Tao, she's got a crit weapon on her, she's got a crit ascension stat, it's going to be much easier for you to get very high crit values. So for those, you at least want to have 60 to 120 crit ratio or even higher. And for your artifact levels, you can leave them at level 16 at this stage because again, it does get exponentially more difficult to raise an artifact's level from 16 to 20, and you're going to be farming mostly artifacts at this stage, so you're going to want to have some resources available to level those artifacts to see if they can be upgrades to yours. If you want more tips on artifacts, I have a full artifact guide that I'm going to link in the description and the end card. Now for the exceptions during this phase, for characters that scale differently, so for example, Nilou. Nilou scales directly off of level. Nilou, Kuki, characters that deal primarily transformative reaction damage, so generally Bloom, Hyper Bloom, or Swirl such as Anemo, instead of stopping at level 80, you want to level them to 90. But the resources counterbalance because these characters generally do not need any or very, very minor talent investment. Nilou doesn't need any talent investment. I just have mine leveled up a bit for fun. Kuki just needs a little bit of levels in her skill so that you get some healing off. Other than that, level 90 is the only difficult thing they need. Their artifact main stats are also going to be easier to get at this point, and so you can focus on these characters in getting correct artifact main stats. But one thing that I forgot to mention is set bonuses. Should I worry about set bonuses at this stage? At this stage, I would worry about getting helpful set bonuses. You want set bonuses that at least add something. So for a character like Kuki, a two-piece elemental mastery set bonus would be just fine and dandy. Only very specific characters, Raiden comes to mind, Ayaka comes to mind, that you actually want to specifically farm their signature set for, because the 4-piece set gives so many stats. In general though, as long as you have a helpful set bonus, that's all you need for the phase 2 built enough stage. Let's go on to phase 3. Phase 3 is min-maxing. For min-maxing, you want to focus on level 90ing your essential onlys character. So if you didn't get around to leveling your Kazuha to 90, or leveling your Kuki to 90, or your Nilou, or characters that do transformative reactions, or your Toma, if he's in a Burgeon team like that, now you want to focus on getting them to 90. You also want to focus on getting characters that deal with aggravate reactions such as Kaching, Alhaitham, or aggravate and spread, those type of pseudo transformative reactions. You want to make sure you get those characters to 90 as well if you didn't before. You want to make sure through this phase that you maintain enough energy recharge to burst off cooldown. I see a lot of people get very focused on the crit stats and kind of let their ER fall to the wayside. Don't do that. If you haven't leveled your weapon to 90, then you want to start doing that now. I forgot to mention the only exception for the previous phase of characters you might not need to take to level 90 is a character like Yelan, who doesn't scale off of base attack, she scales off of base HP. And so one of the main reasons that you want to level 90 a weapon is if they scale is because a large portion of your character's base attack comes from the base attack of the weapon. It's a very important stat and it's not too expensive to do. But for a character that doesn't use base attack like Yelan, you can get away with keeping it at 80 or at 70 depending on how much energy recharge you need. But back to this min-maxing stage. You want to make sure at this stage you can start getting your weapons to 80 or 90. I still haven't taken my weapon to 90 because I don't see the need for it. I probably will eventually, but for most characters, you will want to get their weapons to 90 at this point. You can also start looking at getting your talents to level 9. I would recommend the high value talents go to level 9 at this point and only the high value. The medium value should stay at level 8. So you can see my Yelan's a perfect example. I've left her skill at level 8 and her burst at up to level 9. You don't want to be focused on crowning characters at this stage, and you still don't want to be focused on leveling characters that don't need their talents leveled, such as Nilou or Kazuha. Well, actually for Kazuha, he does quite a bit more personal damage, so you can get his to maybe level 7 or something. But it's definitely a much lower priority than the other things we talked about here. For artifacts, oh yeah, Viridescent Veneer is another 4-piece set bonus that you want to make sure you have for your Anemo characters, even at phase 2. But it's at this point that you want to be farming for your character's best in slot artifact set, or at least close to it. It doesn't have to be the very best, especially if they've got some alternatives that are pretty close in power. Then you can go for a different one that's similar in power. So I think Keqing is a perfect example. She can definitely use this as her best set, but she has other ones that she can use that you can still go for at this point. And your goal now, and you do want to level 20 your artifacts at this stage, and your goal now is going to be to just crank out that crit rate and crit damage as high as your stats will realistically allow. And this is where I start looking at artifact quality. You can choose your own standard. My standard is for a well-built character. I generally look to have around 200 total crit value on their artifacts, and then I consider them a pretty well-built character. The way that you calculate your crit value is you take your crit rate and you multiply it by 2 and you add it to the crit damage. That's because crit rate substats roll at about half the number value that crit damage substats roll, and you generally want about an equal amount of both, leading you to have a 1-to-2 ratio of crit rate to crit damage approximately. You're never going to have exactly, it can be more or less, absolutely, but approximately. So my Keqing is extremely well built. She has much above the 200 crit value minimum that I set for myself, but you can choose your own. You might say 180 is the right amount for you. Your standard might be much higher. You might have a 220 crit value standard. And some characters have other stats that they need to consider. It's not always about crit. You want to make sure that your Alhaitham doesn't have 0 elemental mastery like this one does. You want to make sure your Keqing has elemental mastery as well. You want to make sure your Ayaka has enough attack, right? So at this point, if you're min-maxing, you're gonna need more than just this guide to tell you how to build every single character, because each character has some things that they need to be focusing on. But what you're looking for overall is the most helpful stats on all your artifacts as possible. I'm not just looking at the crit rate on this piece, I'm also seeing, oh, it has energy recharge too. Or I might look at this piece, it has a ton of HP percent, that's really good for her. Again, you'll find more info about this in my artifact guide, but it's really important not to just get hyper-focused on the crit stats, although they often are the bottleneck of a character's damage. Other stats are really important as well, including energy recharge, elemental mastery if the character uses it, HP if the character uses it, attack if the character uses it. And so you're going to want to look for artifacts that have as much of those helpful substats as possible, but generally at least 60 to 120 crit ratio, up to 80 to 160 or higher. Start level 20 your artifacts and start looking for upgrades that have other better stats. There's great tools such as the damage optimizer. You can just Google Genshin damage optimizer that can help you figure out which artifact set and stats are going to be better for your character and which will be upgrades or not. But that's the end of level 3, but there is a final and 4th stage that we have to talk about, and that is character simping. For character simping, you will select a handful of characters that you just love, that they're your favorite characters and you want to get the most value possible out of these characters. For these characters, you want to level 90 them regardless. And it's not based on meta, it's just based on who you love. I level 90'd my Raiden long before I used her in an Aggravate team, before Aggravate even existed. There was no real reason to level 90 her, except that I wanted to make her the best she possibly could be. So that's what you want to look at. You level 90 just because you love them. The second thing is, I will repeat myself again, you want to make sure you maintain enough ER to burst off of cooldown. Just because you love Yelan, you got her an amazing crit ratio, you got her Aqua Simulacra weapon, but you still don't have enough ER to burst on cooldown, she's all sizzle and no steak. She looks good and she smells good, but behind closed doors, she is not someone that you want to hang out with. You can show her off to your friends how pretty and amazing she is, but when it comes down to actually hanging out with her, she is a terrible person to be around. That is ER. Make sure you have enough ER. Obviously, if you haven't level 90 their weapon at this point, you definitely need to. You can even go for their signature weapon if you want to, if you're just that much of a simp for that character. Again, I certainly am with Raiden. I don't even use the engulfing lightning, barely at all. You can see it's on my Toma. I almost always use the catch because we're testing every character at C0, so I don't even use her best weapon 90% of the time, but I still wished for it. Same with Shenhe's because I love these characters and I just wanted them to look their best. It's at this point only that you also want to consider crowning your characters. Of course, you can crown your characters for meta reasons, but almost definitely it's going to take a pretty long time, I'll say this, to have good enough artifacts that it's worth actually popping the crown on your character. I realize that it's a guaranteed upgrade, but it is expensive. It takes a lot of Mora and resin to do, but of course, if they're your favorite character, it is a guaranteed upgrade. You should definitely do it, but you just want to make sure that you walk the line between actually getting all your characters geared with artifacts. If you still don't have characters geared with artifacts or really copium artifacts, you don't want to be crowning talents because you should be putting that resin towards the place it can be the most useful. And speaking of artifacts, during the character simping phase, this is the time where you just farm artifacts until your hair turns purple, aka forever, because that is basically the end game of Genshin, is min-maxing your artifacts until you get the absolute best things possible. I've farmed my artifacts for my Raiden for so long, and at this point her ratio is quite excellent. She's probably my best built character by far. We are definitely in the character simping phase with this character. I did want to add or correct or clarify just one thing on this phase, because it's not just about simping for characters at this stage, it's also the hyper min-maxing phase. And the hyper min-maxing phase is basically when there's a concept called horizontal investment and there's vertical investment. And horizontal investment means investing in a greater number of characters, and vertical investment is more investing into one team or one character in particular. And at this stage, the simping phase or the hyper min-maxing phase, you are more concerned with vertical investment. So you've already built enough characters that you need, and so now you're doing everything you can to min-max into one character. And of course, you know, if you're hyper min-maxing into a team, you do want to crown the relevant talents, right? Crowning things like Raiden's burst has really high value, like Eula's burst, probably Bennett's burst has really high value. Yelan's burst, Xingqiu's burst. These are crowns that you can justify that you can use. And it's probably more correct to call those hyper min-maxing, whereas a character simping would be crowning Raiden's skill. There's no reason to crown Raiden's skill. So you could almost add a sixth phase and have hyper min-maxing and then character simping. But probably if you're at this point in building your characters, you know what to do at this stage. And so I'm probably preaching to the choir at this point. But just so you know, when I say character simping, I should be more correct in saying hyper min-maxing, because it is optimal to not just farm artifacts forever and eventually go for that crown, right? There is that balance. You want to farm artifacts to a level that is reasonably high, then go for the crown, then go back to farming artifacts. But you don't want to go all the way to crown with still bad artifacts. And you also don't want to go all the way with artifacts without crowning. Hopefully that makes sense. Let me know in the comments if you have questions. But of course, there's only so much I can go through in one video, and there will be plenty of amazing tips that our wonderful community has in the comments, so make sure to check those out. If you haven't seen my artifact guide, check out that video right there, and subscribe for more. Bye for now.